The small, dimly lit diner was nearly empty, save for a young boy sitting at the counter with his head bent low. His name was Elijah, a 16-year-old who wore the weight of the world on his shoulders. He looked like any other teenager, except for the layers of stress and worry that seemed to define his life. He was lanky, with a face that hadn't yet fully shed its boyish innocence, but his eyes betrayed something deeper, a sadness that never quite left. Elijah's family had been struggling for as long as he could remember. His mother worked long hours at a local factory, but the pay was barely enough to cover rent, much less food and other necessities. His father had left when he was just a toddler, and since then, his mother had carried the burden of raising him alone. Despite their financial troubles, Elijah never once heard his mother complain. She smiled every day, despite everything, and always found a way to make sure he had enough to eat, even if it meant going without herself. Today was no different. Elijah had a few dollars in his pocket from a small job he had picked up at a neighborhood convenience store. He had saved up just enough to get himself a meal at his favorite diner. It wasn't much, a simple bowl of soup and a slice of bread, but it was more than he had had for days. As he sat at the counter, his stomach growled louder than the murmur of the diner's old jukebox. He tried to ignore the hunger pains, his fingers tapping lightly against the counter. The bell above the door jingled as a frail elderly couple entered the diner. Their faces were weathered with age, but their smiles were warm, radiating a sense of love and happiness that seemed out of place in the worn-down diner. They took a seat at the table next to Elijah, and the waitress, a woman named Clara, greeted them with a smile. Elijah, despite his own hunger, couldn't help but watch the couple. There was something so peaceful about them, so full of life despite their years. They reminded him of his grandparents, who had passed away when he was younger. After ordering their meals, the elderly couple began chatting in soft voices, their conversation filled with quiet laughter and stories of days long gone. Elijah couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. How could they remain so happy when they had probably lived through much worse than he had? He didn't know, but he admired them for it. The couple's meal arrived, and Clara set down their plates with a cheerful, "Enjoy." As the old man reached for his wallet, Elijah's heart sank. He could see the couple's hands trembling slightly, and the old woman's face was etched with concern as she peered into her purse. They were clearly struggling. Elijah knew what it felt like to worry about money, to not have enough. He had been there before, and the thought of the elderly couple being unable to pay for their meal struck him deeply. He quickly counted the few dollars in his pocket, realizing he had just enough to cover their meal. Without a second thought, he stood up and walked to the counter. "Excuse me, Miss Clara," he said softly. "I'll pay for their meal." Clara raised an eyebrow, a little taken aback. "Are you sure, Elijah? That's a lot of money for you." He nodded, a quiet determination in his eyes. "It's the right thing to do." Clara hesitated but smiled, clearly moved by the boy's gesture. "All right, then. I'll add it to your tab." Elijah walked back to his seat, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't explain why he had done it, but something inside him told him it was the right decision. He had seen enough suffering in his own life to know that sometimes, a small act of kindness could change everything. A few minutes later, the elderly couple finished their meal, and the old man reached for his wallet once more. Clara smiled gently and shook her head. "It's already been taken care of," she said softly. The couple looked at each other in surprise, then turned to Elijah, who was sitting quietly at the counter. The old man's eyes softened, his voice cracking slightly as he spoke. "Son, why would you do this for us? We don't have much, and we didn't ask for your help." Elijah smiled shyly. "It's just the right thing to do, sir." The old woman reached out and placed her hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You are a good boy. The world could use more people like you." Elijah felt his heart swell, but also a deep sadness. He knew they couldn't repay him, but the gratitude in their eyes was all he needed. After a few more words of thanks, the couple left the diner, their steps a little lighter than before. Elijah watched them go, feeling a sense of warmth fill his chest. He finished his meal in silence, feeling the weight of his decision settle into his bones. It wasn't about the money, it was about making someone else's day better when they least expected it. It was about giving, even when you had little to give. The next day, as Elijah returned home from school, he was surprised to see a sleek black car parked in front of his modest house. A well-dressed man, tall and confident, stepped out of the car and approached him. The man's presence seemed out of place in the small neighborhood, but his smile was warm. "Elijah?" the man asked. Elijah nodded, uncertain of who this person was. "I'm Samuel Williams," the man said, extending his hand. "I believe we met yesterday." Elijah's mind raced, trying to place him. "I don't think I know you, sir." The man chuckled softly. "Not directly, no. But I know you. You paid for an elderly couple's meal yesterday at the diner." Elijah felt a flush of embarrassment. I didn't think it was a big deal." Samuel's smile deepened. "To them, it was. But to me, it's something much bigger." Elijah blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" Samuel's expression softened. "I'm not just any man. I'm a businessman, one who has been blessed with a great deal of wealth. And when I saw your kindness, it reminded me of something important. How much good can come from the simplest acts of compassion?" Elijah's heart raced. Was this some kind of joke? Samuel continued, "I've spent my life accumulating wealth, but I've realized that the most valuable thing I can give isn't money, it's the ability to share my success with others. That's why I'm here, Elijah. I want to give you the chance to change your life. I want to help you." Elijah shook his head, struggling to understand. "Help me? I don't need anything." "No," Samuel interrupted gently. "You don't need anything. But you deserve more. I've set up a scholarship for you, a full ride to any college you want. I'll make sure your family is taken care of, too. The choice is yours, Elijah. I want to give you a future." The world seemed to spin around Elijah. This couldn't be real. A millionaire? A scholarship? For him? I don't understand," Elijah stammered, his voice thick with emotion. "Why me?" Samuel smiled again, that same warmth in his eyes. "Because you chose to give when you had nothing to give. You showed me that kindness doesn't come from abundance, it comes from the heart. And that is worth more than any fortune I've ever made." Tears filled Elijah's eyes as he stood there, overwhelmed by the generosity of this stranger. He thought of his mother, his struggles, the pain he had carried for so long. And now, in an instant, everything had changed. Samuel gave Elijah a final, encouraging look before turning to leave. "Take care, Elijah. Remember, kindness is never wasted." As the car drove away, Elijah stood in front of his house, his heart full, his future uncertain but bright. He had always known that the world wasn't fair, but now, he understood something deeper, that kindness had a way of finding its way back to you when you least expected it. And sometimes, the smallest gestures could change everything. The next day, as Elijah walked into school with his head held high, he realized something incredible. It wasn't the money that had made him rich, it was the kindness he had shown, the love he had shared, and the people who had been touched by his generosity. The world was full of unexpected twists, but if there was one thing he knew for sure now, it was that kindness always had a way of returning when you needed it most. And so, Elijah's life began anew, not defined by his circumstances, but by the choices he made, choices that would inspire others for years to come.